Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most? Someone who looked you in the eye and stabbed you in the back when you were at your most vulnerable? Today's story is about Sharon Carter, a 58-year-old widow who discovered that the most dangerous enemy can sometimes be your own family. 2 days after burying her husband, Sharon's son delivered the ultimate betrayal, but what he didn't know was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about a woman who refused to be underestimated and turned her greatest heartbreak into her most powerful weapon. If you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or written off because of your age or circumstances, Sharon's story will show you exactly how dangerous it can be to underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. So grab your coffee, settle in, and prepare yourself for one of the most calculated and devastating revenge stories you'll ever hear. Trust me, by the end of this, you'll never look at a grieving widow the same way again. The rain hadn't stopped since morning, as if the sky itself mourned my husband David's passing. I stood beside his mahogany casket, draped in black Chanel, watching the last mourners file past with their hollow condolences. At 58, I'd learned that grief comes in waves, but today, something else stirred beneath my widow's veil: anticipation. My son Marcus approached as the cemetery emptied, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the wet stone. At 32, he carried himself with the arrogance that comes from inheriting wealth rather than earning it. His designer suit couldn't hide the weakness in his shoulders, the softness around his middle that spoke of too much comfort and too little character. "Mother," he said, his voice carrying none of the warmth a grieving son should have. "We need to talk about the business." I dabbed my eyes with a silk handkerchief, playing the fragile widow. "Marcus, darling, surely this can wait. Your father's barely in the ground." He shifted uncomfortably, glancing around to ensure we were alone among the headstones. "Actually, it can't wait. I've already handled it." The rain intensified, drumming against my umbrella like impatient fingers. "Handled what?" Marcus straightened his tie, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "Carter Industries. I sold it yesterday." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. For a moment, I felt nothing but the cold October rain seeping through my gloves. Then, slowly, understanding bloomed in my chest like a poisonous flower. "You sold it." My voice barely rose above a whisper. "I got a decent offer," he said, avoiding my eyes. 20 million. Quick, clean transaction. No drawn-out probate battles, no board meetings, no hassle. 20 million. For a company worth at least 50 million. My late husband David had built Carter Industries from nothing, a small construction firm that grew into a real estate empire spanning 3 states. 40 years of blood, sweat, and sleepless nights, reduced to Marcus's idea of a quick transaction. "And my share?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would infuriate me. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded check. "Your share of the liquid assets comes to $5,000. I know it's not much, but..." I stared at the check, rain droplets blurring the ink. $5,000. From a $20 million sale of a company I'd helped build alongside my husband for decades. While Marcus pocketed the rest as the rightful heir. "Who bought it?" I asked quietly. Marcus frowned at the question. "Some investment firm." "Why does it matter?" I looked up at him then, really looked at him. My son, who'd never worked a day in his life. Who'd been handed every opportunity on a silver platter and had squandered most of them. Who thought himself clever for robbing his grieving mother of her life's work. What was the name of the firm? I don't remember off the top of my head. Something corporate sounding. He waved his hand dismissively. "Look, Mother, I know this seems sudden, but I had to think about our future." "Your future. You'll be comfortable with your inheritance from Dad's personal accounts, and this way, you won't have to worry about running a company at your age." "At my age?" as if 58 meant I was ready for the nursing home. I folded the check carefully and slipped it into my purse. You're right, darling. I suppose I should be grateful you're looking out for me. Relief washed over Marcus's face. He'd expected a fight, tears, dramatics. Instead, I smiled, a small, serene smile that seemed to confuse him. Just tell me, I said, stepping closer to him under his umbrella. The buyer's name. I'd like to send them a welcome note, wish them luck with David's legacy. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through his emails. Here it is. Whitmore Holdings, LLC. Strange name, come to think of it. Almost sounds like. He stopped mid-sentence, the color draining from his face. His phone trembled in his hand as he stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. Whitmore, he whispered. I nodded, still smiling that same serene smile. My maiden name, darling. The name I used when I incorporated my own investment firm 15 years ago. The same firm that just bought Carter Industries for $20 million. The rain seemed to pound harder now, matching the frantic rhythm of my son's breathing. Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You can't. That's impossible. Is it? I reached out and gently touched his cheek, the way I used to when he was small and had nightmares. Did you really think I'd spent all these years just playing the dutiful wife? That I'd never prepared for a future without your father? Marcus stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a headstone. But the paperwork, the lawyer said. The lawyers you chose, you mean? The ones who didn't bother to do proper due diligence on the buyer? Oh, Marcus. You always were so eager to take shortcuts. I opened my purse and pulled out the $5,000 check, holding it up between two fingers. The rain immediately began to dissolve the ink. Consider this your finder's fee, I said, releasing the check. It fluttered to the muddy ground like a dying bird. After all, you did help me acquire my late husband's company at a considerable discount. Marcus was hyperventilating now, his expensive suit soaked through. You can't do this. I'm your son. I'm David's son. Yes, you are. And that's the only reason you're not going to prison for attempted fraud. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But make no mistake, my darling boy. You've just made the biggest mistake of your privileged little life. I turned and began walking toward my car, leaving Marcus standing alone among the graves. Behind me, I could hear him calling my name, his voice breaking like a child's. But I didn't look back. The game had only just begun. As I drove away from the cemetery, I caught a glimpse of Marcus in my rearview mirror. He was on his hands and knees, trying to piece together the soggy remains of the check he'd so smugly handed me. The sight should have filled me with satisfaction, but all I felt was a cold, patient hunger. $20 million. My son thought he'd cheated me out of my life's work for a quick payday. He had no idea that he'd just sold his birthright to the one person who had every intention of making him pay for his betrayal in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The widow's game had begun, and Marcus had just made the opening move. I smiled as I drove through the rain, already planning my next chapter in this carefully orchestrated symphony of revenge. If you've ever felt underestimated because of your age, your gender, or your circumstances, this story is for you. And if you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Sharon's story is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The revenge she's planning will shock you. 3 days after the funeral, I sat in the executive boardroom of Carter Industries for the first time as its new owner. The mahogany table where David had made countless deals now reflected my image, a woman transformed. Gone was the grieving widow's black. Today, I wore a sharp navy suit that spoke of power and purpose. My first order of business was calling a meeting with the senior staff. They filed in nervously, unsure of what to expect from David's wife. Most had barely acknowledged my existence during company events, dismissing me as mere decoration on David's arm. Today, they would learn otherwise. "Good morning," I said, standing at the head of the table. For those who don't know me beyond charity galas and Christmas parties, I'm Sharon Carter, your new CEO. The silence that followed was deafening. James Wellington, the CFO who'd worked with David for 15 years, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter, with all due respect, we understood that Marcus would be taking over." "Marcus sold the company," I interrupted smoothly. "To me. Whitmore Holdings now owns 100% of Carter Industries, and I am Whitmore Holdings." I slid copies of the purchase agreement across the table. "Everything is legal and binding." Marcus received his $20 million, minus taxes of course, and walked away. "Now, shall we discuss the future of this company?" The next hour was spent reviewing financials, ongoing projects, and strategic plans. To their surprise, I knew every detail, every contract, every investment, every potential pitfall. While they'd assumed I was just David's pretty wife, I'd been studying this business for 20 years. "Our first priority," I announced, "is expanding the Tampa project. Double the investment." James frowned. "Ma'am, that's extremely aggressive. We'd be risking significant capital, which we have, thanks to some recent liquid capital injection." I smiled. "Trust me, gentlemen. I know what I'm doing." As the meeting concluded, I made one final announcement. "Oh, and I'll need someone to handle our social media presence. We're going to be making some waves, and I want the whole city to know that Carter Industries is entering a new era of unprecedented growth." After they filed out, I sat alone in David's chair, my chair now, and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. By lunch, word would spread through the city's business community. Sharon Carter, the underestimated widow, had just taken control of a major real estate empire. Meanwhile, I knew exactly what Marcus was doing. According to my private investigator, he was celebrating his windfall at the country club, buying rounds for anyone who'd listened to his story about outsmarting his old man's business partners. If only he knew that his celebration was part of my plan. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I went shopping for myself. Not for clothes to please David or to blend into the background at his business dinners. I bought a wardrobe that reflected the woman I was becoming. Sharp blazers, elegant dresses that commanded attention, shoes that clicked with authority. My final stop was a jewelry store, where I purchased a stunning sapphire necklace, the kind of piece David never would have approved of as too flashy. But David was gone, and Sharon Carter was just beginning. I returned home to find 17 missed calls from Marcus. His voicemail messages progressed from confusion to panic to rage. The final one, left just an hour earlier, was barely coherent. "Mom, you have to call me back. Something's wrong. The lawyers won't return my calls, and there's something about the sale. Please just call me." I poured myself a glass of David's best wine, my wine now, and deleted the messages without responding. Instead, I called my interior decorator. "Hello, Susan. It's Sharon Carter. I'm ready for that complete home renovation we discussed." "Yes, everything. I want every trace of the old house gone by Christmas." As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The grieving widow was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized but was eager to meet. The woman staring back at me had sharp eyes, perfect posture, and a smile that held secrets. Marcus thought he'd won a fortune by betraying his mother. He had no idea that his betrayal had just set in motion a carefully orchestrated plan that would strip away everything he thought he'd gained, one piece at a time. The puppet master was in position, and all the strings were in my hands. Tomorrow I would begin pulling them. 2 weeks into November, Carter Industries made its first major headlines under my leadership. The Tampa project had not only doubled in scope, but had attracted national investors. The business journals couldn't stop praising the visionary new leadership that had transformed a stagnant family business into a dynamic growth enterprise. I made sure Marcus saw every article. My private investigator, a discreet woman named Patricia, whom I'd hired through my law firm, provided daily reports on Marcus's activities. His initial euphoria was beginning to fade as reality set in. $20 million, while substantial, wasn't the endless fortune he'd imagined when split between taxes, debts, and his extravagant lifestyle. He's been buying expensive watches, Patricia reported during our weekly meeting at a downtown cafe. A Rolex last week, a Patek Philippe yesterday. Classic signs of someone trying to display wealth they're not sure they have. I stirred my coffee thoughtfully. And his living situation? Still in that penthouse apartment, but I've heard whispers he's behind on the rent. Apparently, he assumed the trust fund from his father would continue indefinitely. He didn't realize that most of David's assets were tied up in the business he just sold. Perfect. Marcus had sold the golden goose and was now wondering why there were no more golden eggs. That afternoon, I implemented phase 2 of my plan. I called Marcus for the first time since the cemetery. "Darling," I said when he answered, my voice warm with maternal affection. "I've been thinking about you so much. How are you adjusting?" The relief in his voice was palpable.
Mom.
"Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. There's been some kind of mistake." "What kind of mistake, sweetheart?" "With the sale. The lawyers are saying things that don't make sense. They're saying that you were the buyer?" I let a gentle laugh slip through the phone. "Oh, Marcus. I know it must seem confusing. I should have told you sooner about my little investment company. I started it years ago, just as a hobby really. Something to keep me busy while your father worked. But that means... It means you sold your inheritance to your mother, darling. At quite a reasonable price, I might add." I kept my tone light, almost amused. "Don't worry, though. The business is in good hands. I'm sure your father would be proud of how well it's doing." The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. "Marcus? Are you there?" "I need to see you," he said finally, his voice hollow. "We need to talk about this." "Of course, darling. Why don't you come for dinner Sunday? I'm having the house redone, but the kitchen is still functional." After I hung up, I allowed myself a small smile. The confusion I'd heard in Marcus's voice was music to my ears. But confusion was just the beginning. That evening, I attended the annual Children's Hospital Gala, alone, for the first time in 20 years. The whispers followed me through the ballroom. Sharon Carter, the widow who took over her husband's business. She's made Carter Industries more profitable in a month than it was in the last 5 years. I heard her son sold it to her without knowing who the buyer was. The pity I'd expected to face as a new widow had transformed into something else entirely: respect. And perhaps a little fear. Judge Patricia Henley, an old acquaintance from the country club, approached me during cocktails. "Sharon, dear, you look absolutely radiant. That's quite a transformation from David's funeral." "Thank you, Patricia. I'm discovering that grief can be surprisingly liberating." She raised an eyebrow at my choice of words. "And how is Marcus handling everything? I heard he came into quite a bit of money recently." "Marcus is adjusting," I said carefully, "learning to manage his new circumstances." What I didn't mention was that those circumstances were about to become much more challenging. The next morning, I made a phone call to Marcus's landlord, a call that would set the next phase of my plan into motion. Hello, Mr. Davidson. This is Sharon Carter. I believe you know my son, Marcus. I have a business proposition that might interest you. By the end of the day, I had quietly purchased the building where Marcus lived. As his new landlord, I would have considerable influence over his living situation. The rent would soon be increasing, and the lease terms would become much more restrictive. Meanwhile, I'd begun spreading word through the city's social circles about my brave new venture in business. The narrative was perfect. The grieving widow who discovered her late husband's company had been sold for a fraction of its value, but who'd stepped up to save the family legacy. Marcus was becoming a footnote in my story, the reckless son who nearly destroyed his father's life's work through his haste to cash out. That night, I stood in my renovated master bedroom, looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably lying awake, trying to make sense of what had happened to his carefully planned future. Soon, he would discover that confusion was the least of his problems. The first cracks in his confidence were showing, but I was just getting started. Sunday dinner arrived with the first snow of winter. I'd spent the day preparing Marcus's favorite meal from childhood, pot roast with all the trimmings. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was cooking comfort food for the son I was systematically destroying. Marcus arrived 20 minutes late, looking haggard. His expensive clothes couldn't hide the weight loss or the dark circles under his eyes. The confident man who'd stood beside his father's grave was already beginning to crack. "You look thin, darling," I said, kissing his cheek. "Are you eating enough?" "I've been stressed," he admitted, following me into the dining room. The renovation had transformed the house into something modern and elegant, nothing like the traditional home David had preferred. Marcus looked around with barely concealed unease. "You've changed everything," he said. I thought it was time for a fresh start. I served him a generous portion of roast. "Now, tell me what's troubling you." Marcus set down his fork and looked directly at me for the first time since arriving. "Mom, I need to understand what happened with the business. Did you know it was me selling it when you bought it?" I took a sip of wine, considering my response carefully. I knew Carter Industries was for sale, yes. My investment firm monitors all major business transactions in the city. When I saw David's company on the market for such an interesting price, I couldn't pass up the opportunity. "But you had to know I was the seller." "Not initially," I lied smoothly. "The sale went through several intermediaries. I only discovered my own son had sold his inheritance when the papers were finalized." Marcus's face went white. "So, you could have stopped it." "Could I?" "You'd already signed the contracts, darling. You'd already taken the money. What was I supposed to do? Let someone else buy the company David built? Let his legacy go to strangers?" The logic was flawless, the guilt devastating. I watched Marcus wrestle with the realization that his mother hadn't conspired against him. She'd simply been better at business than he was. "I need the company back," he said suddenly. "I made a mistake. I'll pay you back the $20 million plus interest. We can reverse the sale." I set down my wine glass and studied him with what I hoped looked like maternal sympathy. "Oh, Marcus. Sweetheart. That's not how business works. But you're my mother. And you're my son. Which is why I'm going to give you some free advice. Learn from this mistake and move on. You have $20 million. Most people would consider that a fortune. Most of it's gone to taxes and debts," he admitted quietly. I felt a flutter of satisfaction, but kept my expression neutral. "Then you need to be more careful with money. Perhaps get a job." The word job hung in the air like a slap. Marcus stared at me as if I'd suggested he become a circus performer. "A job? Mom, I'm a Carter. Carters don't work for other people. Your father worked for other people before he built his own company. I'm working now, running Carter Industries. Work isn't beneath you, darling. Entitlement is." Marcus pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor.
This isn't you.
This cold, calculating person, this isn't my mother. I stood as well, moving around the table to place my hands on his shoulders. This is who I've always been. You just never bothered to look. After he left, storming out without finishing dinner, I called Patricia for an update. The rent increase notice was delivered this morning, she reported. Triple the current amount due next month. And I have an interesting development. Marcus tried to apply for a loan using Carter Industries as collateral. I laughed. How did that go? About as well as you'd expect. He doesn't understand that he no longer has any stake in the company. Perfect. What about the other arrangements? Everything's in place. The country club membership will lapse due to administrative issues with payment processing. His credit cards will start getting declined due to security concerns that require additional verification. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable to you, just a series of inconvenient coincidences that will make his life increasingly difficult. That week, Carter Industries announced its expansion into commercial development, a move that made headlines in the business section. The article included a photo of me at my desk, looking confident and successful. The caption read, "Sharon Carter has transformed her late husband's company into a growth powerhouse, proving that sometimes the best business leaders emerge from unexpected places." Marcus called that evening, drunk and rambling about public humiliation and family loyalty. I let the call go to voicemail. The next day, I attended a Chamber of Commerce luncheon where I was introduced as one of the city's rising business stars. The applause was genuine, the networking opportunities endless. 3 separate investors approached me about potential partnerships. Meanwhile, according to Patricia's surveillance, Marcus had been turned away from his usual table at his favorite restaurant due to credit issues and had been asked to leave the country club after a heated argument about his membership status. That evening, I treated myself to a massage and facial at the city's most exclusive spa. As I relaxed in the steam room, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. 6 weeks ago, I'd been planning a future as a wealthy widow, comfortable but unremarkable. Now, I was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who commanded respect, who made decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars. And it had all started with my son's betrayal. Marcus had thought he was stealing my future. Instead, he'd given me the keys to a life I never knew I wanted. The transformation was intoxicating, and I was only getting started. December brought the first real snow and Marcus's first real panic. Patricia's surveillance reports painted a picture of a man coming apart at the seams. The penthouse apartment was gone. He'd moved to a modest 2-bedroom rental across town. His expensive car had been repossessed. The designer clothes were replaced with off-the-rack suits that hung loose on his shrinking frame. But the physical changes were nothing compared to the psychological ones. He's been calling old friends, trying to borrow money, Patricia reported over coffee. Most of them won't take his calls anymore. The ones who do are politely declining to help. And his attempts to rejoin the business community. Laughable. He tried to schedule a meeting with the Richardson Group about a potential investment opportunity. They asked for his company credentials and financial backing. When he couldn't provide either, they realized who he was, the Carter heir who sold his inheritance for a quick payout. I stirred honey into my tea, savoring every detail. How is he handling this social isolation? Not well. He's been drinking heavily. My sources at his usual bars say he's become somewhat of a laughingstock, telling anyone who'll listen that his mother stole his company. The irony was perfect. Marcus had spent his life coasting on the Carter name and his father's reputation. Now, that same name was becoming a liability. He was no longer Marcus Carter, heir to a business empire. He was Marcus Carter, the fool who sold his birthright to his own mother. That afternoon, I made a decision that would push Marcus closer to the edge. I called his new landlord. Mr. Peterson? This is Sharon Carter from Carter Industries. I believe you have my son as a tenant. I wanted to discuss a small matter. 20 minutes later, Marcus would be receiving an eviction notice. Not for non-payment. He still had enough money for rent, but for violating the building's professional standards clause. Apparently, several neighbors had complained about loud, drunken disturbances and inappropriate behavior. I discovered that money could solve many problems, including creating new ones for people you wanted to destroy. That evening, Marcus appeared at my door unannounced. I opened it to find him standing in the snow, his coat wrinkled, his hair unkempt. The polished, arrogant man from the funeral was gone. In his place stood someone who looked desperate and dangerous. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into the foyer. I closed the door calmly and followed him into the living room. "You look terrible, darling. Are you sleeping?" "Don't," he snapped, spinning to face me. "Don't act like the concerned mother. Not after what you've done to me." I settled into David's old chair. "My chair now," and gestured for him to sit. He remained standing, pacing like a caged animal. "What exactly have I done to you?" "You know what you've done. The eviction notice, the credit problems, the way everyone in this city suddenly treats me like a pariah. This is all you, isn't it?" I kept my expression neutral, even as satisfaction bloomed in my chest. "Marcus, you're being paranoid. You sold a valuable company for far less than it was worth. People in business circles are going to talk." "It's not just talk." He stopped pacing and stared at me with wild eyes. "It's like the whole world has turned against me. Like there's some conspiracy." "Perhaps," I said gently, "this is what consequences look like." The word hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, gripping the mantelpiece for support. "Consequences for what?" "For betraying your family. For selling your father's life work without a second thought. For trying to cheat your mother out of her rightful share." I stood and moved closer to him. "Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" Marcus's breathing became shallow, panicked. "You're my mother. You're supposed to love me unconditionally." "I do love you," I said, reaching out to touch his face. He flinched away from my hand. "But love doesn't mean protecting you from the results of your choices." "Please," he whispered, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to have nightmares. "Please, just tell me what I need to do to fix this. I'll do anything." I studied his face, the desperation, the fear, the dawning realization that he was completely out of his depth. This was the moment I'd been working toward, when Marcus would understand that he was no longer in control of his life. "There's nothing to fix, darling. This is your life now. You made your choice at your father's funeral. Now you get to live with it." He left that night without another word, walking out into the snow like a broken ghost. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at the window, watching his figure disappear into the darkness. Phase 3 was complete. Marcus was isolated, desperate, and beginning to crack under the pressure of his new reality. But I wasn't finished with him yet. Isolation was just the foundation. True psychological warfare required much more creativity. It was time to make Marcus question not just his circumstances, but his sanity itself. Christmas came and went without any contact from Marcus. I spent the holiday in Aspen, skiing and networking with potential investors. The photos I posted on social media showed a confident, successful woman embracing her new life. I made sure Marcus would see them. Meanwhile, Patricia's surveillance revealed that my son had spent Christmas alone in his small apartment, ordering Chinese takeout and drinking cheap wine. The contrast was deliberate and devastating. When I returned to the city in early January, I implemented the most delicate phase of my plan. It required precision, subtlety, and a deep understanding of Marcus's psychological weaknesses I'd observed for 32 years. I began with small things. A Christmas card from his father, postmarked after David's death, slipped under his apartment door. Inside, David's handwriting, which I'd practiced for weeks, delivered a simple message. I'm disappointed in you, son. Marcus called me within hours, his voice shaking. Mom, did you get a card from Dad? What do you mean, darling? A Christmas card. In his handwriting. But that's impossible because he's dead. I let concern color my voice. Marcus, are you feeling all right? Maybe you should see someone. Grief can make us imagine things. The seed of doubt was planted. Next came the photographs. Marcus had always been vain about his appearance, particularly a modeling headshot from college that he kept framed on his dresser. I had the photograph doctored slightly, removing his smile, adding shadows under his eyes, and replaced it while he was out job hunting. When he noticed the change, he called again. Someone's been in my apartment, he said, his voice tight with paranoia. Who would break into your apartment, sweetheart? I don't know, but they changed things. My photograph looks different. Dad's picture keeps moving from the dresser to the nightstand. Marcus, you're scaring me. Are you eating? Sleeping? These small psychological intrusions continued throughout January. A coffee mug that appeared and disappeared from his kitchen. His father's cologne mysteriously sprayed in his apartment. Phone calls in the middle of the night with no one on the other end. Each incident was minor enough to doubt, but together they created a pattern of uncertainty that began to erode Marcus's grip on reality. Patricia reported that he'd started talking to himself, checking locks obsessively, and avoiding sleep. Perfect. The masterpiece came in February. I hired an actor, an older man who resembled David from a distance, to appear in places where Marcus might see him. A glimpse across a crowded restaurant. A figure in the park that vanished when Marcus looked directly at it. A man in David's old coat walking away just as Marcus turned a corner. The calls became daily occurrences. I saw him again, Marcus would whisper into the phone. I know it's impossible, but I saw Dad. He was watching me from across the street, and when I tried to approach him, he disappeared. Marcus, your father is dead. I buried him myself. Then who am I seeing? Who's been leaving his things in my apartment? I suggested therapy. Marcus refused, convinced that therapists would dismiss his experiences as hallucinations. Instead, he began researching paranormal activity and supernatural encounters, desperately seeking an explanation that would preserve his sanity. Meanwhile, Carter Industries continued to thrive under my leadership. I'd been featured on the cover of Business Weekly with the headline, "The Widow's Wisdom, Sharon Carter's Remarkable Rise." The article praised my intuitive business sense and uncanny ability to transform challenges into opportunities. Marcus saw the article. He called that night sobbing. Everyone loves you, he said. Everyone thinks you're so amazing, so strong, so successful. But I know what you really are. What am I, Marcus? You're evil. You're destroying me, and everyone thinks you're a saint. I let silence stretch between us before responding. I think you need help, darling. Professional help. I need my father's company back. I need my life back. Your father's company was never yours to begin with. And as for your life, you're the only one responsible for what it's become. The psychological pressure was working exactly as planned. Marcus was becoming paranoid, isolated, and increasingly unstable. But he wasn't broken yet. For that, I would need to attack the last thing he had left, his sense of identity as a Carter. It was time for the final phase. March brought the annual Riverside Business Awards ceremony, the city's most prestigious gathering of entrepreneurs, investors, and industry leaders. Carter Industries had been nominated in 3 categories, and I was personally nominated for Executive of the Year. I bought a new dress for the occasion, midnight blue silk that made me look 10 years younger. My hair was styled in a sleek updo, and I wore the sapphire necklace I'd bought after David's funeral. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who commanded attention and respect. Marcus, according to Patricia's surveillance, had been obsessing over the ceremony for weeks. He'd somehow acquired an invitation, probably forged or borrowed, and was planning to attend. She'd overheard him practicing a speech about reclaiming his rightful place in the family business. Perfect. The Riverside Grand Hotel was packed with the city's elite. I worked the room like the seasoned professional I'd become, discussing potential partnerships, sharing insights about market trends, and accepting congratulations on Carter Industries' remarkable success. I was in conversation with the mayor when I spotted Marcus across the ballroom. He looked like a shadow of his former self, too thin in an ill-fitting tuxedo that had probably been rented at the last minute. His eyes darted around the room wildly, and he was muttering to himself. He made his way through the crowd, approaching various business leaders who recognized him with barely concealed embarrassment. I watched as he tried to join conversations, only to have people politely excuse themselves and walk away. When dinner was announced, I took my seat at the head table, a position reserved for the evening's most honored guests. Marcus remained standing near the back of the room, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The awards ceremony proceeded smoothly until Carter Industries was announced as winner of Commercial Development Company of the Year. I rose to accept the award, walking to the podium with confidence as applause filled the ballroom. "Thank you," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "This award represents not just the success of Carter Industries, but the power of resilience in the face of adversity. When my husband David passed away last year, many people wondered if his company would survive. Some even suggested it might be best to sell it quickly rather than risk failure." I paused, my eyes finding Marcus in the crowd. His face had gone pale. But I believe that true legacy isn't about taking the easy path. It's about having the courage to build something greater than yourself, even when others doubt your ability to succeed. David's company isn't just surviving. It's thriving, because sometimes the most unexpected leaders are the ones who've been quietly preparing for their moment all along. The applause was thunderous. As I returned to my seat, I noticed Marcus pushing through the crowd toward the front of the room. His movements were erratic, desperate. The ceremony continued with the presentation of Executive of the Year. When my name was announced, I wasn't surprised. I'd been privately told I was the frontrunner. But as I stood to accept the award, Marcus's voice cut through the applause. "Stop," he shouted, standing in the middle of the ballroom. "This is wrong. She stole my company. She's not a hero. She's a thief." The ballroom fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward Marcus, whose chest was heaving as if he'd run a marathon. Security guards began moving toward him, but I held up my hand to stop them. "Marcus," I said gently into the microphone, my voice carrying maternal concern rather than anger. "Perhaps you should sit down. Don't you dare patronize me." He pointed an accusatory finger at me. "Tell them the truth. Tell them how you manipulated the sale, how you've been destroying my life piece by piece." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see the confusion on people's faces, this disheveled man claiming to be victimized by the poised, successful woman they'd been celebrating. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said calmly, "I'm sorry you have to witness this. My son has been struggling with some personal issues since his father's death. Grief affects people in different ways." "I'm not crazy," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking. "She's been gaslighting me for months, moving things in my apartment, hiring people to follow me, making me think I was seeing my dead father." The crowd was watching now like spectators at a car accident. Some people had their phones out recording. I realized this moment would be on social media within minutes. Marcus Carter, heir to a business empire, having a public breakdown at the city's most prestigious business event. "Marcus, please," I said, stepping down from the podium and moving toward him with my arms outstretched. "Let me help you. Stay away from me." He backed away, stumbling over a chair. "You all think she's so wonderful, don't you? The grieving widow who built a business empire. But I know what she really is. She's a monster wearing my mother's face." Security guards finally stepped in, gently but firmly escorting Marcus toward the exit as he continued shouting about conspiracies and manipulation. His voice echoed through the ballroom even as the doors closed behind him. "She's not who you think she is. She's destroyed everything." The silence that followed was deafening. I returned to the podium, accepting my award with a sad smile. "I'm sorry you all had to see that," I said. "My son is unwell. He's been struggling to accept his father's death and his own role in some unfortunate business decisions. I ask for your prayers and your discretion as our family deals with this difficult situation." The sympathy was immediate and overwhelming. People rushed to offer support, to share their own stories of family members struggling with mental health issues, to praise my grace under pressure. By the time I left the hotel that evening, the narrative was set. Sharon Carter, the successful businesswoman and devoted mother, dealing with the heartbreak of a son's psychological breakdown with dignity and compassion. Marcus's version of events, the truth about manipulation and psychological warfare, sounded like the ravings of a madman, which, in a way, they were. I'd driven him to the edge of sanity so effectively that even when he told the truth, no one would believe him. The next morning, the local news covered the incident with a headline, "Business Leader's Son Disrupts Awards Ceremony." The article painted Marcus as a troubled young man whose family was seeking help for his condition. I was quoted as saying, "We love Marcus unconditionally and are committed to getting him the help he needs." The perfect final touch to his complete public humiliation. Sharon's masterful manipulation has reached its peak, but this isn't over yet. Her son's public breakdown is just the beginning of his complete destruction. If you're enjoying this psychological thriller, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. The next chapters will show you exactly how far a mother's revenge can go. And remember, if you or someone you know has ever felt powerless against those who've wronged you, our book Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain offers real strategies for overcoming betrayal and rebuilding your strength. The link is in the description below. After the awards ceremony debacle, Marcus disappeared for 2 weeks. Patricia lost track of him completely. His apartment was abandoned, his phone disconnected, his last known associates claiming they hadn't seen him. For a brief moment, I wondered if I'd pushed him too far, if my son had done something irreversible. Then he appeared in my office on a rainy Tuesday morning in April. I was reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant buzzed me. "Mrs. Carter? There's a gentleman here who claims to be your son. He doesn't look well." I found Marcus in the lobby of Carter Industries, a ghost of the man he'd once been. His clothes were wrinkled and dirty, his hair unwashed, his face gaunt with exhaustion. He clutched a worn baseball cap in his hands, one David had given him years ago. "Hello, Marcus," I said gently. "Would you like to come up to my office?" He nodded without speaking, following me to the elevator like a beaten dog. The executives and employees we passed stared openly at him, recognizing the heir who'd sold his birthright. Their expressions ranged from pity to barely concealed disgust. In my office, David's office, which I'd completely redesigned, Marcus slumped into the chair across from my desk. The confident, entitled man from the funeral was gone. In his place sat someone broken, desperate, and completely defeated. "I need help," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I poured him a glass of water from the crystal pitcher on my desk. "What kind of help?" "I need a job." The word seemed to physically pain him. "I've applied everywhere. No one will hire me. They all know who I am, what I did." I'm sleeping in my car." I studied his face, seeing the last remnants of pride crumbling away. This was the moment I'd been orchestrating for months, when Marcus would finally understand his position in our new dynamic. "You want to work here?" I asked. "I know it seems impossible. I know you have every right to refuse. But I'm desperate, Mom. I've lost everything." His voice broke on the last word. "I made a terrible mistake, and I'm willing to do anything to make it right." I leaned back in my executive chair, considering. This was delicious. My son begging for scraps from the table he'd once thought was his by right. "There might be something," I said slowly. "We do have an opening in maintenance. The pay is minimum wage, and it's primarily custodial work. Cleaning bathrooms, emptying trash cans, mopping floors." Marcus's face went white. "Custodial work?" "It's honest work," I said firmly. "The kind of work your grandfather did before he built his first construction crew." "Are you too proud for honest work, Marcus?" I watched him wrestle with his options. Pride warred with desperation, and desperation won. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not too proud." "Good. You'll start Monday morning at 6 a.m. Report to Frank in maintenance." "And Marcus?" I fixed him with a stern look. "You'll be treated like any other employee. No special privileges because you're my son. In fact, people will expect you to work twice as hard to prove you deserve to be here." He nodded numbly. "There's one more thing," I continued. "You'll need to wear a uniform. Frank will provide it. And you'll need to sign a standard employment agreement, including a clause about maintaining professional conduct at all times." The humiliation was complete. Marcus Carter, who'd once thought himself heir to a business empire, would now be cleaning the toilets in his father's company while wearing a janitor's uniform. "Thank you," he whispered. After he left, I called Frank Morrison, our maintenance supervisor, a gruff, no-nonsense man who'd worked for the company for 20 years. "Frank, I'm sending you a new hire Monday. Marcus Carter. I want you to treat him exactly like any other employee. No better, no worse. He's here to work, not to socialize." "Carter?" Frank's confusion was evident, as in, "Yes. And Frank, he's going to need to prove himself. I trust you'll make sure he understands what real work looks like." Frank chuckled grimly. "Oh, I'll make sure he understands, Mrs. Carter." That weekend, I attended the spring gala for the Children's Art Foundation, an event I'd never been invited to while David was alive, but which now courted my attendance as one of the city's most successful business leaders. I wore a stunning emerald dress and spent the evening networking with potential clients and investors. Monday morning, I arrived at the office early to witness Marcus's first day. Through my window, I watched him trudge across the parking lot in his maintenance uniform, navy blue coveralls with Carter Industries embroidered on the pocket. The irony was perfect. Throughout the day, I received reports from various employees about Marcus's performance. He cleaned bathrooms without complaint, emptied trash cans methodically, and mopped floors in silence. The executives who'd once kowtowed to him as the heir apparent now stepped around him as if he were invisible. At lunch, I saw him sitting alone in the employee break room, eating a sandwich from a vending machine. The contrast with our family dinners at the country club was stark and intentional. By the end of his first week, Marcus had found his rhythm in his new role. He arrived early, worked diligently, and left without speaking to anyone unless absolutely necessary. The proud, arrogant man who'd sold his inheritance was gone, replaced by a broken janitor who cleaned up other people's messes. But I wasn't finished with him yet. The final phase of my revenge required one last twist, a revelation that would destroy not just his present and future, but rewrite his understanding of his entire past. It was time for Marcus to learn the truth about his father's will. Summer arrived with unprecedented success for Carter Industries. We'd expanded into 3 new markets, acquired 2 smaller competitors, and doubled our annual revenue. The business press couldn't stop praising my Midas touch and intuitive understanding of market dynamics. I was featured on the cover of Forbes with the headline, "The Widow Who Conquered Sharon Carter's Business Empire." The article detailed my transformation from devoted wife to industry titan and speculated about my future plans for expansion. Marcus read every article. I knew because I found them in the break room trash, carefully torn out and crumpled up. He never mentioned them, maintaining his role as the silent janitor who cleaned up after more successful people. But I could see the articles eating away at him. Each glowing review of my success was another reminder of what he'd thrown away, another twist of the knife I'd been slowly driving into his soul for 10 months. It was during the August board meeting that I decided to deliver the final blow. Before we adjourn, I announced to the assembled executives, "I have some historical information to share that puts our recent success in context." I pulled out a manila folder I'd been saving for this moment, David's original will, the one Marcus had never bothered to read carefully. When my husband died, my son made certain assumptions about his inheritance. He believed, as the only child, that he would inherit the majority of David's assets, including Carter Industries. The board members listened with polite attention, unsure where this was heading. However, David's will was quite specific about the conditions of that inheritance. Marcus would only inherit the business if he worked for the company for at least 5 years and demonstrated both competence and commitment to the family legacy. A few eyebrows raised around the table. This was new information to most of them. Since Marcus chose to sell his inheritance immediately upon David's death, without fulfilling any of the stipulated conditions, he automatically forfeited any claim to the business. According to the will, in such circumstances, all assets would revert to me as the surviving spouse. I smiled at the stunned faces around the table. Which means, legally speaking, Marcus never actually owned the company he sold to me. He sold something he had no right to sell, to someone who already owned it. The implications were staggering. Marcus hadn't just made a bad business decision. He'd committed attempted fraud, albeit unknowingly. "I've had my lawyers review the situation thoroughly," I continued. "While no criminal charges would be warranted, Marcus acted in ignorance rather than malice. It does mean that the $20 million he received was essentially a gift from me, not a legitimate sale." After the meeting, I walked downstairs to the maintenance department. I found Marcus in the supply closet, organizing cleaning chemicals with the same methodical attention to detail he'd once applied to his appearance. "Marcus, could I speak with you for a moment?" He looked up, startled. We rarely spoke during business hours, maintaining the fiction that he was just another employee. I handed him a copy of David's will. "I thought you might want to read this. The relevant section is highlighted." His hands trembled as he read the inheritance clause. I watched his face go through a series of emotions: confusion, realization, horror, and finally, complete devastation. "This means," he began, his voice barely audible, "it means you never owned the company," I confirmed gently. "You never had the right to sell it. Everything you thought you knew about your inheritance was wrong." Marcus slumped against the supply shelf, the will falling from his nerveless fingers. "But the lawyers, they said what you wanted to hear. You were so eager to cash out that you never asked the right questions." I picked up the will and folded it carefully. "Your father knew you, Marcus. He knew you weren't ready for responsibility. The conditions in his will weren't arbitrary. They were his attempt to make you worthy of your inheritance. So, the $20 million was a gift from your mother to her son. Money you never earned, from a sale that was never legitimate." I paused, watching him process this information. "Which means every dollar you spent was charity." The psychological impact was devastating. Not only had Marcus lost everything through his own greed and impatience, but he never actually had anything to lose in the first place. His entire identity as the heir to a business empire had been an illusion. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he whispered. "Because you needed to learn. You needed to understand what real work looks like, what consequences feel like, what it means to have nothing and build something from that nothing." I softened my voice slightly. "Your father tried to teach you these lessons when he was alive. You refused to learn. So life taught you instead." I turned to leave, then paused at the supply closet door. "Oh, and Marcus? Your performance as a janitor has been exemplary. Frank tells me you're one of his most reliable workers. Perhaps you're finally learning what your father tried to teach you about the dignity of honest work." That evening, I attended a charity auction where I successfully bid on a vacation package to Tuscany. The photographer from the society page captured me smiling as I held up my winning paddle, the picture of a successful woman enjoying the fruits of her labor. Meanwhile, according to security footage, Marcus spent his evening shift methodically cleaning the executive bathrooms, including the one adjoining my office. The symbolism was perfect. The son who'd tried to steal his mother's future now literally cleaning up her messes. But there was one final twist to my revenge, one last revelation that would cement Marcus's destruction while ensuring my own legacy. It was time to show him exactly how deep my planning had gone, and how completely he'd been outmaneuvered from the very beginning. October brought the first anniversary of David's death and the perfect moment for the final act of my revenge. I'd planned this moment for exactly 1 year, orchestrating every detail with the precision of a master chess player moving pieces into position for checkmate. I called Marcus into my office on a Friday afternoon, ostensibly to discuss his work performance. He'd been with the company as a janitor for 6 months, and by all accounts, he performed his duties adequately. The once proud heir had accepted his role with the resignation of a broken man. "Sit down, Marcus," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "We need to talk." He sat carefully, still wearing his maintenance uniform. The past year had aged him dramatically. His hair was graying at the temples. His face was lined with stress and exhaustion. At 32, he looked older than his father had at 50. "I wanted to discuss your future with the company," I began. "You've been a model employee in maintenance for the past 6 months, and I think it's time to consider whether there might be other opportunities for you here." A flicker of hope crossed his face, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in months. "However," I continued, "before we discuss your future, I think you deserve to know the complete truth about your past." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder, one I'd been saving for this exact moment. "Do you remember, Marcus, how surprised you were that a company called Whitmore Holdings was able to move so quickly to purchase Carter Industries? How we seemed to have financing in place immediately?" He nodded warily. "Did you ever wonder how I'd managed to build an investment firm substantial enough to afford a $20 million acquisition?" I smiled. After all, I was just David's wife. I'd never worked outside the home. Where would I get that kind of capital? I could see him trying to work through the logic, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The truth is, Marcus, I've been planning for this possibility for 15 years. Ever since you dropped out of college for the 3rd time, and your father finally admitted that you might never be capable of running the family business." I pulled out the first document from the folder. Articles of Incorporation for Whitmore Holdings, dated 15 years earlier. I started the company in 2009, initially as a small investment fund. David helped me with the seed money, actually. He thought it was important for me to have my own financial independence. Marcus stared at the document, trying to process what I was telling him. Over the years, I've been very carefully building Whitmore Holdings into something substantial. I've made strategic investments, acquired smaller companies, built relationships throughout the business community, all while pretending to be nothing more than a devoted wife and mother. I pulled out investment records, acquisition documents, financial statements, 15 years of careful planning and strategic business development. By the time your father died, Whitmore Holdings was worth approximately $60 million. More than enough to purchase Carter Industries and absorb it into my existing portfolio. The color drained from Marcus's face as the implications became clear. You see, your father and I had many long conversations about your limitations. We both hoped you'd eventually mature into someone capable of responsibility. But David was a practical man. He knew there was a possibility you'd never be ready to inherit the business he'd built. I leaned forward, fixing him with a steady gaze. So we made contingency plans. The will was structured to give you a chance to prove yourself, but also to ensure that if you failed, the business would remain in capable hands. My hands. Marcus finally found his voice. You planned this whole thing? I planned for the possibility that you might be exactly who you turned out to be, selfish, impatient, and utterly unprepared for real responsibility. I pulled out another document. This is a contract your father and I signed 5 years ago, essentially agreeing that if you chose to sell the business rather than run it, I would be the buyer. His hands shook as he read the contract. So, when I sold to you, you were following a script we'd written years earlier. The only thing that surprised me was how eager you were to fulfill our worst expectations of you. I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city where Carter Industries had now become the cornerstone of a much larger business empire. The irony, Marcus, is that you could have had everything. If you'd simply honored your father's wishes, worked for the company, learned the business, demonstrated even basic competence, you would have inherited one of the most successful enterprises in the city. I turned back to face him. Instead, you chose the easy path. And in doing so, you handed me the keys to an empire I'd been quietly building for 15 years. Marcus was hyperventilating now, his chest rising and falling rapidly as the full scope of his situation became clear. The psychological pressure, the isolation, the public humiliation, those were just extras. My way of ensuring you understood the consequences of betraying family. But the real punishment was always going to be watching me succeed with the legacy you threw away. I returned to my desk and pulled out one final document. Which brings us to your future. I slid a contract across the desk. I'm offering you a promotion. Assistant Manager of Facilities. A salary of $40,000 a year, basic benefits, and the opportunity to work your way up through the ranks of a company that could have been yours. Marcus stared at the contract without touching it. The alternative is to leave Carter Industries and try to build a life somewhere else. With no references, no work history, and a reputation as the man who sold his birthright for quick cash. I watched him wrestle with the choice, pride versus survival, defiance versus acceptance. What's it going to be, Marcus? He picked up the pen with trembling fingers and signed his name to the contract. With that signature, he officially accepted his new role as a mid-level employee in the company his father had built, the business he'd once thought he would inherit. Welcome to your new life, I said softly. I hope you'll find it educational. As Marcus left my office, still wearing his janitor's uniform but carrying the contract that would make him a permanent part of my business empire, I felt a profound sense of completion. I'd achieved something remarkable. Not just revenge, but transformation. I'd taken my son's betrayal and used it as the foundation for my own rise to power. What Marcus had intended as theft had become the catalyst for my emergence as one of the city's most successful business leaders. That evening, I celebrated with champagne and caviar in my newly renovated penthouse. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the city lights twinkling like stars. Somewhere down there, Marcus was probably sitting in his small apartment, trying to process the magnitude of his defeat. He'd thought he was stealing my future. Instead, he'd given me the greatest gift imaginable, the motivation to become someone I never knew I could be. The grieving widow was gone. In her place stood Sharon Carter, business mogul, master strategist, and architect of the most elegant revenge in the city's history. Marcus would spend the rest of his life working for me, watching me succeed with the empire he'd handed to me, serving as a daily reminder to everyone who knew our story about the consequences of betraying family. And I would spend my remaining years building something even greater than David had imagined. A business empire that would outlast us all, run by the woman who'd been underestimated for so long that even her own son had forgotten she was capable of brilliance. The widow's game was complete. The queen had won. And there you have it, the perfect revenge, executed with surgical precision and devastating results. Sharon didn't just get even with her son. She used his betrayal to build an empire and claim the respect she'd always deserved. If this story has shown you anything, it's that being underestimated can be your greatest advantage. Sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. What did you think of Sharon's masterful revenge? Was it justified? Or did she go too far? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories of justice, revenge, and triumph. Your story might be next, so never let anyone convince you that you're powerless. You might just surprise them all. Hit that like button if Sharon's story inspired you, and remember, check out our book Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain in the description below. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, but sometimes it requires a little more creativity. Thanks for watching her true stories, and I'll see you in the next episode.